eventually.
And I guess it's doing it.
Okay, great.
Let me check to be sure. The red record button is on, but I don't know if that means that it's on or off.
I just got a notice that this was being recorded and I had to click OK.
Oh, then it's
So,
probably being recorded.
yeah. All right. Well,
Awesome.
we'll give it a go. And let me do a brief intro. Um, Greetings, everyone. This is Ethan Miller, and we are recording this, our second session of LCDC Presents. And our topic today will be further investigation of uh, working with those on the autism spectrum, transitioning into new environments, workplace, school. And with us today, we have Diana Dalmitas Cull and Dr. Stephen Shore. Diana from the Bridges program at Adelphi University, and Stephen, uh, professor of special education at Adelphi University. And once again, I'm Ethan Miller, and I am representing the Language and Cognitive Development Center. And so off we go, guys. Another recorded session.
All right. And I've got my special
Very
pen here
exciting.
to take notes. And Diana knows what this pen is. I'm trying to get it to show up. There it is.
And we have new technology. This is a recording pen. Um, so he, I have an old school pen. Just click once and we have ink available. But so um, I had a question or two for you that I sort of briefed Stephen on about what a coach might do for their client who is in this situation where they're about to go to a university program. What a person who is supportive, and that might include a family member as well. What are what would be some kind of guidelines? Because as Stephen pointed out to me, there are boundaries that a coach maybe has to follow along.
Yeah, so I think especially transitioning from high school to college, I think one of the biggest barriers, especially for family members, is what we know as FERPA, which is a law that prevents families and parents from speaking to professors and other staff at Adelphi. So, in order to kind of create that bridge into communication, that was one of the reasons why a lot of families enroll their students in a support program like Bridges.
Hmm.
We ask for consent to speak to family members, and as long as the student provides it to us, because what's most important is making sure our students are comfortable and they're willing to self advocate and they're comfortable with disclosing that information, it allows us to really have different lines of communication between faculty to parents to other providers. And for a lot of our students who are transitioning from high school to college, I think the biggest barrier for them is navigating in those what I call gray areas.
Yeah.
Knowing how you're doing academically, figuring out how to socialize with your peers because each class has different students, each environment has different unwritten rules of navigating. Um, we often refer to that as the hidden curriculum. And it could be a lot of adaptation, even sensory rise from environment to environment. If students don't have that sense of awareness into what their individualized differences are and how they present, it could create a lot of hidden barriers for them. So what we do in Bridges is we provide a lot of self-reflection, insight, suggestive tools, and skills to help the students understand how to further navigate um, into these hidden areas, further understand that, if they are getting reactive in a certain situation, maybe there's a sensory difference at play or a communication style difference, and further understanding what they can do to enhance that sense of insight, but also determine if that's the true reaction they want or if there's something different, a different outcome perhaps from that situation.
Let me ask you something, because a lot of, if it's a family member, it's one thing. If it's not a family member, but there has to be sort of a baseline prior amount of communication, understanding. This can't be a person who's suddenly been assigned to this student. There has to be some background here, I assume, and there has to be a level of trust already developed.
Yes.
So, um, suppose there is, a need for a person for the student that doesn't exist. What do you do? I mean, if the family members, they got other demands on them, a, and a coach hasn't been assigned. How do you take those? I mean, those are pretty major building blocks that
Mhm.
if they don't have someone who they have a level of trust with, um, how do you fill in the blanks there?
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of students in college struggle, right? Not
Yeah.
having that touch person, not having that person who understands who you are and understands how your differences get activated and how you see the world and how to support you into leading to a place of self-advocacy and interdependence. And I think, you know, that's where it is a challenge. I think that's why programs like Bridges, neurodivergent support programs, have been successful for our students because we get to understand who the student is. We get to understand what it looks like when things are great, when things are bad, when things are stressful, and when they're not. Um, and we work with the students to become more um, aware of when these situations happen so then they can learn the tools and skills to apply them independently on their own without us having to prompt or guide. But
Mm.
I think for that initial transition, especially that first year, first 2 years, or just sometimes even ongoing, um, you do need someone with that guidance. You do need someone to understand who you are because if not, it's so easy to just become another face in the room, another student in the class. And for a lot of students, especially those with autism and perhaps their disabilities may present to be more invisible, I think that's where masking occurs. I think that's where then, that emotional difficulties happen because colleges and, basically praise students for knowing how to adapt quickly, for
Yeah.
knowing how to, navigate in different contexts and in a very rapid, fast pace. And then you think about for students with autism, they may have information processing differences. It may take them a little bit longer to understand different, teaching styles, different ways of navigating, and the expectation for them to adapt quickly and process quickly may be unrealistic.
Yeah.
Um,
That sounds like very, very possible. What I was wondering is is there a process of matching that the student might go through with the Bridges or with you to find someone that they can feel comfortable reaching out to, or um,
yeah,
how does that work?
yeah, that's an excellent question. So, the way our program is structured is we have the majority of our support services are provided through student workers at Adelphi. So we serve as a professional development site where we train our staff extensively and we oversee them on a continuous basis to ensure they're supporting our students by providing quality support. But one of the things we do have is what we call check-in meetings that are seen as transitional counseling. And those meetings are with a full time staff member who then serves as the student's case manager.
Got it.
So what we will have is we will have our staff. We have a total of 10 staff members. We have a total of 120 students. So, roughly each staff member has 12 students that they oversee and they meet with on a continuous basis. And then they also supervise the staff. So that staff member serves as kind of the know-it-all, the understanding, the making sure we're remaining consistent and supporting the student. Um, and also, providing suggestive guidelines because again, students are different, right? Each one is
Yeah.
individual. So some students may be more chatty, some students may not. Some students may not want to talk about certain topics because that may be triggers to them. Other students may love, topics of specific interest. So we kind of have a little sheet of like, each student to help staff members understand, but then we also meet as a team to talk
Right.
about each student and make sure we're working holistically all together. Because it's so easy to have so many providers or so many different kinds of support. And we may be actually giving students conflicting advice if we're not all on the same page.
Hmm.
So that's where this team collaboration is so critical for us and so valuable too, because what we may see in one meeting, another staff member may see something completely different. So
Got it.
really having those open conversations helps us understand, oh wow, like that student actually really felt open and really shared a lot of information once we tried this approach versus a different approach where maybe the student is shutting down more because maybe we're firing too many questions at a time or maybe we're being too definitive with our stance and our style. So
So
I
this,
always say there's not a clear equation, but a
uh,
lot of different trials and errors.
yeah, it sounds like almost a clinical approach where one person, carries a caseload of students, a manageable caseload, and then there's a group. The staff meets as a group to get some um, feedback and problem solve, troubleshoot, I guess. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Stephen, what's your take on process here for uh, working with a kid who's in this situation?
Well, it's as Diana mentioned, that trust piece is so important,
Mm,
and it generalizes to so many things, ranging from parents or guardians, family members, to the people within a support program such as Bridges, and that also extends to faculty as well, the university. Students being able to trust people, trust all the contact points
yes. Yeah.
that they're involved in, so they can have open conversations and they don't fear being blamed for, you're wrong, you shouldn't have done that, but more like let's work together to if there was a mistake, let's just work together to see how we can do things better next time. And if something needs to be fixed, let's see how we can fix or repair maybe some
Interesting.
damage that was done due to a meltdown, for example, or a student inappropriately announcing, without raising their hand, of course, saying that the professor is wrong, you're wrong on this, or telling the professor that this assignment was stupid when we know it probably is stupid, but
Uh,
we can't say we can't
better
say
ways, better ways to do that, right? To
right.
deliver that information. Um, this is really interesting because, as Stephen said, trust is huge and I am almost positive, Diana, that you would want student to be able to reach out in a perfect way, which might be tough for someone with autism, reach out to their contact point, and you want um, contact person not to feel overly intimidated about reaching out to the client too in this case, correct?
A
Or-
100%.
yeah, because it's not just the client who can get intimidated in these situations, um, although it's more likely to be the student who's going to have problems saying, "Oh, I better get to my contact and discuss this problem I'm having. You want that to be uh, fluid, open channel of communication. And can you tell us about a success where that happened? Can you give us some example?
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of touch on Stephen's point, I think, like he was saying, trust is so critical. And I think what we often tell our staff is the number one indicator of trust is students returning to meeting, students returning outreach, right? Because it's
Right.
so easy to kind of question whether or not someone is benefiting from service because sometimes it's not going to show up in them verbally praising
Right.
or acknowledging. But what I tell a lot of my staff is, did they come to the second meeting? Did they come to the third meeting? That's an
Right.
indication you're doing a good job because people will not come back if they feel like they're not receiving support and help.
Mm,
And a lot of the times I tell my staff that when someone comes to ask you for support, even if it's not in your field of expertise, even if it's not in your field of knowledge, doing all that you can to help them find the answer, whether it's, looking it up and seeing, okay, like I may not be proficient in mathematics. But if someone comes to me and says, I have a math problem, helping them book a tutoring appointment. So they could go to someone and get that support. That is demonstrating that I want to be there to support them. And a lot of times we find that with our incoming students, especially when they're navigating with different professors. A lot of professors, they may be well meaning, but sometimes it's very easy to kind of create a reaction.
yeah.
And sometimes students don't realize they're feeding into that reaction and it becomes a dynamic and it may not be positive. So one of the things we do with Bridges is we reach out to faculty at the start of the semester as long as we get consent to let them know a student's enrolled in their class. And we offer faculty the opportunity to consult with us. But what we also let students know is that if they feel like they want to meet with faculty and maybe they're a little anxious or a little stressed, we are
Right.
more than welcome to go into those meetings with them to kind of serve as that bridge for communication, as that transitional support object
Right.
for the student.
Awesome.
Because there's a lot of miscommunication on both ends, I will
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Sometimes professors don't realize they're not being clear. They think they are, but they may not be. And that could aggravate a student more, or that could cause a student to ask repetitive questions. And professors assume this person's not hearing me, they're not processing, and that may not be the case. It could be that the student's not fully understanding what the professor's communicating.
Right
Or
on.
sometimes there's a processing delay. Sometimes we need to repeat ourselves once or twice. And if I always say, if I have to repeat myself 3 times and after that the person has it, I'm fine with repeating myself 3 times. So we do a lot with faculty to try to challenge those biases, because it's very easy to sometimes take neurodivergent, differences and, aspects to take it personally. Sometimes I hear from faculty, oh, the students continuously coming late or they're not turning in assignments. They must not care. And a lot of the times I work with faculty to kind of reframe the way they're thinking about it. Maybe it's not that. Maybe it's executive functioning. Maybe they just can never get on time to places. And if that's the case, we can work with the student on our end for a strategy to support them. But for faculty, that's where we really want to welcome that communication, because the more we know, the more we can help students. Because if we ask a student how our class is going, the response is everything's fine because no one's telling me otherwise. Um, and I
I
think that's
could,
one of the biggest difficulties for students in college.
interesting. I could definitely see someone with autism keying off a professor's uh, personality traits or style and taking that
Mhm.
personally as something that was not going is not going to work for them or is
Yes.
is maybe taking it personally as against them in some way. So I could definitely see that happening. So your role is very, very key to defuse a lot of these things and make it a more productive, uh, you know, relationship or learning experience. But I had a moment of insight when you were talking about the person coming back to a second or third meeting, and that shows uh, interest in your being the contact to help them. And are there tools that you use to make those meetings more accessible? Is there a fun element? Is there a task? Is there how do you frame those meetings for um, is that broad, too broad?
Yeah. No, I think that's a very good question. I think one of the biggest things, and this is something that Stephen and I have talked about, is really doing that sensory inventory when someone comes into your office. I remember when Stephen once came into my office and I had a bright light that was kind of visually
Uh-huh.
just too much. And I just remember Steven sharing that. And after he shared that, I was like, oh my gosh, like how many students perhaps have come into my office and had a similar experience, but never felt comfortable to share that. So after we had that experience with one another, that was something I started doing with students who ever walked into my office. Like, is everything
Hmm.
comfortable for you? Do I need to turn on the fan? Maybe it's too hot. Maybe it's too cold. Do I need to change the lighting? I always leave a bunch of fidget items on my desk for reach in case students need to
Hmm.
engage because a lot of times students feel like they just need to tolerate the environment and they can't request for any adaptation. So I think starting that off in the beginning is already setting a welcoming stage essentially or a welcoming office um,
Got it.
to say, I want to hear your perspective. And that's also something I always talk about with my students in the meetings is when we're trying out strategies, I'll ask them directly, is this something helpful to you? If
That's
not, that's okay. If it is, great. But I'm not expecting that everything I'm going to suggest is going to work 100%. Sometimes we have to tailor to like really meet the student's needs. Sometimes, we think a strategy is going to be so effective, and then the student's like, that was horrible. It was not helpful for me. And I appreciate that feedback. I welcome that feedback because if it's not serving the student, then why would I keep suggesting it?
right.
Um,
Right.
so I think, allowing them to have that voice. And then also for some of my students, I always leave tools out for them too. So for some of my students, when they may get overwhelmed, they may just shut down verbally. They may not be able to speak. So I'll always encourage them to either text what they want to say, type it out, or even write it out, depending on the student. Some of my students also have dysgraphia, so expecting them to write physically out what they're thinking is not effective. But
Yeah.
sometimes just typing it out and also reminding them that you know to take their time. We have plenty of time because I think sometimes when students shut down verbally, it's because they feel pressed in that moment to say what they have to say, and they feel conscious of time. So a lot of it is me just letting students know, like, if you want to talk about it, we can. If you don't want to, that's okay too. I think giving them always a choice is so critical because a lot of times, students with autism get imposed upon what the other person wants as
I think
opposed to
that's
what they want.
that's a very um, powerful tool, reducing the time pressure. Because, or even by just stating, like, take your time. We're not
Yeah,
in a hurry here. I could see how that would kind of let the client relax a little bit and start to feel more comfortable about giving information since time is a pressure.
absolutely.
And it's like a classroom. You don't want it to look like a classroom when you're meeting with them in this sense. Stephen, can you jump in here on
Yeah, a
perspective?
couple things that come to mind is one is uh, the first is theory of mind, and what we're really engaging in is developing a better theory of mind. And when I say that, it's not, as so commonly assumed, the autistic person needs to understand the non-autistic person's point of view, but it's more a meeting in the middle. And Diana or myself or anybody who's supporting an autistic or otherwise neurodivergent individual, student or otherwise, we need to understand them. We both need to work to understand each other. The trust, the open conversation, it takes us a long way there. So back to Diana's example in the office, in her office, she's got this great light. However, it points at the person who is sitting across the desk. Maybe because it helps Diana see them better, which it probably does. And that's all well and good. And then it's a matter of considering it from the other person's point of view. And I was perfectly fine with telling Diana the light's too bright, got to do something about it, maybe even make a joke about it, call it a sensory violation. And Diana is so absolutely right. We need to be on the lookout for students who are initially gun shy at asking for an accommodation or even mentioning something as simple as the light.
Yeah, this is really important because every time you're telling them that it's okay to ask for that accommodation, you're kind of empowering. You're
Mhm.
empowering them to say, "Hey, you know, I work better like this." You're basically saying, "I work better when I get my point across that the light is too bright, and or I'm feeling pressed for time, or whatever." But that's another interesting point is by giving them choices about how things are, the way Diana expressed, um, going through her checklist, or uh, you're teaching in a very kind of subtle way that they can always ask for a adaptation, and it's empowering that they get that information. So
Right.
wonderful.
It's teaching effective self-advocacy, incidentally.
Self-advocacy, yeah.
And if a student, for example, should rudely tell Diana or anybody on the other side that light is in their face, it's too bright, or something of that nature, then we can talk about with complete
How to go.
understanding. Yes, let's change the light, and now let's talk about in the future, especially with somebody else who might not quite
Yeah.
understand. How do we go about telling the professor that, or whoever it might be? And
And that's something we often talk about, with our students is we talk about what's their desired outcome when they're communicating. Do they want someone to hear what they have to say and receive it well? Or, do we want someone to, have, a negative response? Because sometimes students don't realize, and I wouldn't say students, I just say people in general, because again, it's that theory of mind piece. People don't realize that perhaps their way they're communicating or expressing themselves in the moment is actually working against them instead of for them.
So, and student doesn't want a negative response to their exclamation that the light is too bright. They don't want a negative response. Like say, you don't like the light, get out of the room. Like or leave. That would not be a desired outcome. Obviously, you want a professor. Says, hold on a second, I can turn it down a bit. That's the desired outcome from someone who isn't an autism professional. Uh, that's the outcome you want from a stranger. So I can
Mhm.
turn that down, or so that's the portion that's a refinement on your. It's kind of a refinement on um, your empowerment phase. It's like a two-part phase. So
Yeah.
quite good. Um, So can you give me an example of a success, something that happened with your program where you had someone just sort of have that eureka or epiphany? That would be
Yeah, sure. So I had a student um who when he would get anxious, he would start emailing people excessively. And his emails were very short and very straight to the point. And he had one professor who basically told him that if he keeps emailing her like this, he will have to drop the class because he will not be able to pass the class. And again, that was a very extreme reaction from the professor. And the student came and spoke to me. So I had to basically have a twofold conversation. One with the professor explaining to about the student, explaining about how they respond when they're anxious, justifying that, of course, emailing excessively and becoming demanding is not necessarily the best way to communicate. I definitely don't want to invalidate the professor side, but at the same time, letting the professor know that putting more pressure on the student and then saying, well, now you're going to basically fail the class, um, is making the student even more anxious. And it's just going to create this basically loop of a dynamic. And
right.
then I had a conversation with the student on their side about helping them understand that when they're calm, they're a great student. A lot of professors like them having him in the class. However, when he's not calm, how other people perceive his email communication, how other people may perceive him to be rude or demanding. And when other people are demanding of others, unfortunately, the response is not to want to help someone, not to want to work with them. It's actually the complete opposite. So what's great now is this was when the student was a sophomore. The student is now a senior, and the student did not drop that class. He actually went to the professor, apologized to her. I was in the meeting with him to help, make sure no more miscommunications happened. And they were able to come to a working place because his initial response was, well, maybe I will just drop the class. I don't need her. And I said, hold on, because
Hmm,
you're in this major and she's one of the head professors in the major. So the
right.
realistic expectation that you're never going to have a class with her is not realistic. And we're going to have to figure out a way to work with her as opposed to just initially avoiding and creating more friction with this professor. And I think that's important for a lot of students to understand because it's a great life lesson that we're not going to always have people we like to work with. We're not always going to have bosses that are so understanding, but we have
Right.
to learn how to communicate and how to navigate through it as opposed to just initially avoiding and kind of projecting onto the other person. Well, I don't have to. You don't, but it's not going to make your life easier. I can guarantee you. And he's
And
now a senior. He's now him and that professor actually have a great working relationship. He did an independent study with her, in fact, which is
wow.
very wonderful. Yeah, because that's up to the professor's choice. And he even now is interning at an organization, and he always shares about how he truly values that lesson because it
Hmm,
made him realize perhaps what he was doing wrong in that dynamic. It wasn't just the professor. And he's also grateful that the professor was open to speaking with us. And he actually we do a panel for students to talk about their experiences and working with faculty. It's basically a neurodiversity panel, so faculty can hear from other students' point of views of what works and what doesn't for them. And how faculty can be understanding and supportive. And he always shares that story about how he's very grateful she was willing to seek out Bridges and get support, but also he was grateful that she gave him another chance and then take that experience to be a reflection of his character.
that is amazing story, and it shows a lot of and a lot of effort. And one thing that struck me with excessive emails, because I see this sometimes too. Excessive emails is a kind of it's trying to communicate in a way,
Yes.
and but it's really having as you put it, a negative response, a failed attempt, um, and but by making this connection and being the intermediary, sort of, you were able to kind of explain it from both points of view. And what I was really pleased to hear is how it resolved so nicely. It's like we can work together. It wasn't, you're right, I'm wrong, or I'm right, or
Yes.
you've got to do it my way, or it's like we can work together here. That was really the goal. Um, was there a significant point in that meeting where you had a point of like, oh, I get it. My message isn't getting through, or something like that. Something you recall?
Yeah, well, because it was interesting because when he had the issue with the faculty member, he did the same kind of email communication with me.
Ah,
So when he was emailing me excessively, he literally sent me 10 emails in a span of like 5 hours. He emailed me from like 8 at night to like, well, 12 hours, 8 in the morning. And I just wasn't on my email. And I just saw all the emails come in and I told him, I said, listen, I understand who you are. So I understand this is a sign of your anxiety. However, if this is how you email your professor, I can understand how she's overwhelmed, how she may not know which email to respond first, and how
mm,
that may actually cause her to shut down in communicating, and take it personally because it's kind of that excessive communication that not everyone can tolerate. And once I told him that, he was like, oh my gosh, like I had no idea. Like, again, it was just really out of his awareness. He was just in his perspective. And again, we all know this that when emotions increase, our ability to recognize other people's point of views decreases
decreases.
significantly.
Wow.
And that's exactly what happened. Like, he just was not able to see other people's point of view. And he was just like, I don't understand why people don't respond to me. I was like, I if I didn't know you, I wouldn't respond to you like this. I would have just been like, nope, like not
Oh,
happening.
yeah.
So
That's
having that trusting relationship with him and having that open conversation, I think helped him be like, oh wow, like if Diana doesn't even want to respond to me, okay, maybe something I'm doing is really not working the way I want it to.
yeah. That's that. So um, you got a personal insight from what the problem was from the professor's point of view by
Yes.
the student. That's wow. And of course it's kind of like you got a tidal wave of information from the student that is basically it's all frustration on their part. It's all frustration coming at you.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Wow. That's a tremendous example. Um, and that student's doing well, which is great, which is even better. Um, is there a example of where things were more difficult, didn't go right, um, in one of your cases? Is that
Yeah, what I find for a lot of the students that struggle the most are the students who enroll in our program because they're being pushed by their parents rather than internally wanting to receive the support. Sometimes parents just assume there's going to be difficulties, assume that they need it. And I think when that happens, it creates an automatic sense of defensiveness and sometimes a little bit of a sense of shame because for some of our students, they've had negative past experiences for being associated with a disability. And some of them just, they feel like if they're part of our program, that's a way of outing them automatically.
hmm,
So I always say when those situations happen, it's kind of more of an uphill battle because it takes us longer to really work with the student, really build that trusting relationship because it's hard for someone to receive help if they don't want it. And if they don't want it, there's not much I can do. And sometimes I let parents know that. Sometimes a student will be in our program for a whole semester and not utilize any support. And I encourage the parents to, really consider what message they're sending to their child because, you know, if they're not going to utilize our support, you know, that's really what the student is telling us that they don't need it. That's
Right.
really the unwritten message that's happening. And I think a lot of parents have that anxiety of, well, how will I know if they're doing well? And sometimes I tell parents that, sometimes we need to face those natural consequences. Like if a student's not going to seek help, no matter if we're involved or not, it limits our ability to do interventions or provide support because everything is going to return with I don't need it, I don't want it. And sometimes we see a lot of students who will kind of just not want to acknowledge when they're having problems.
Yeah.
And then they struggle throughout the semester. And I think that's the hardest part on our end because a lot of success stems down to the individual and them willing to receive that support.
Yeah, this is really interesting because I noticed the same type of issue in two different scenarios. You were talking about professors who might need to be, or your staff that might need to be the contact, and offloading and is not an option. You can't offload or hand over. You have to be the conduit, even if it's not your specialty. The math problem is not your specialty. You have to be available. Similarly, the parents can't offload the problem onto you and expect a result with the client.
Yeah.
That obviously probably doesn't sit well with the client. Like, why am I getting this service that I didn't ask for? And I don't think I need it, or even if I need it, I don't want to be treated like this or whatever. You get into all sorts of stuff, but even if the service is would be very helpful, uh, if the parent's using it as some way to offload a responsibility or offload communications, uh, it's not going to happen. You're going to incur problems, is what I get. Stephen, what do you think? Is this something you can relate to with a person with autism?
Yeah, certainly. Again, it goes to that matter of trust. Uh, can you trust that other person? Because
Mm,
autistic people, to at a much greater frequency, experience negative reactions to attempting to socialize, attempting to talk to a professor, communicating with another person. And that example that Diana gave, the frequent email, well, if one email doesn't work, maybe I can get them with the second, and maybe with the 125th email. Maybe
I'm
finally they'll see it.
I'm
So it's a
compelled to
matter,
send more emails. I have to send more emails. And is
yeah.
that, yeah.
So it's
Oh
a
boy.
matter of reframing.
Mm,
And also, as Diana brought up, the importance of educating those who will contact autistic and otherwise neurodivergent individuals. Here we're talking about a uh, university context. So the question is, what can we do to educate professors and other staff at the university? And we can generalize that to coworkers and supervisors in a workplace as well. And I think that is often a great um, gap that we need to fill.
mm,
And just like Diana suggested, as like with the autistic person who needs to want to get support, assistance to learn, so the same goes for us faculty at the university level. It's maintaining a sense of curiosity. So why is the student doing that in the first place? Let's contact the support the location of support that I know of. In this case, it's the Bridges program, and see if I can get some insight as to why that's happening. And I
got
think
it.
the more we can get to that or address
Stephen,
that challenge, the better off we'll
Stephen,
be.
quick question for you, Stephen. Is there for someone in who is a professor or a new boss or a supervisor, is there like a 3 or 5 point checklist that they might go through with someone that said, "Hey, you're going to have an autistic client or an autistic worker. Is there a checklist that they could go through, perhaps? Um, that even if they're not a professional or have had a lot of experience working with neurodivergent people, that they might use as a bit of a guideline?
Yeah, well, one might be to have an open mind,
Have an open
to
mind.
have an open mind, consider different points of view, because I know of many situations where an autistic person has an idea of how to do a job better, or maybe even address a concept better that the professor is trying to bring across. I've had many times when I've been talking about something and a student asks the question, and sometimes a student blurts out a, a response to the question uh, that was addressed to me, but they grab onto it and they say, well, the professor really means this, this, and that. And the student just summarized it and said it so clearly.
Huh.
And in this case, both the professor and the student learned something very valuable. I should say the student with a question. You know, we both learned something very valuable, how to better explain something. And the same holds for a work situation. So that's one. Two is to uh, get to know your support sources, sources for support. So at Adelphi, that's the Bridges program, people involved in the Bridges program. In the workplace, whoever is organizing the inclusion and sense of belonging of autistic and otherwise neurodivergent people in the workplace, uh, who is that contact person? And then finally, just like we do with every, or should be doing with every student and every employee, get to know the person as an individual. And I think those three things that's a good start.
So open mind
Hmm.
the was the first one. Alternative view in this kind of um, how you put it. The student summarizes what the professor says. A third person.
Yeah, well,
Uh,
maybe, yeah, alternate view in that is within that is be prepared to get information from unexpected sources.
Unexpected sources.
Mhm.
Okay. The support sources and treat. And number four I got is
Yeah,
individual. Is the and treat everyone as an individual.
yeah, get to
Um,
know them as an individual.
yeah. Now,
Uh,
I'd like to suggest maybe something that Temple Grandin talks about, and that is this person thinks different. Be aware that
mhm.
this person might think different.
Yes.
Be a visual thinker. Be a mathemat or an analytical thinker. And she had other categories too. But just as a open, as a huge generalization, be aware when and you say have an open mind. Be aware that perhaps this person just thinks different, and that's a start. That's a starting point. So I like this idea of for the uninitiated, a checklist of items that they may want to go through when they know they're working with neurodivergent um, workers, students, um, or associates of some sort. Are we on the
Yeah.
right track there, or
I also would add for employers to also have, just like Steven was saying, open conversations with their employees. And not just the managers, but colleagues. Because a lot of times when autistic people are struggling at work, it's not just the manager who's noticing, it's other colleagues. And sometimes having a colleague, just suggest something or have that conversation can be better received than a manager, because sometimes the idea of a manager calling an employee in to speak one to one, now you feel like, oh no, am I going to be on an improvement plan or am I going to get fired? I think it's so much easier to have that anxiety response. Um, so I think there's a lot of times where I go to other organizations and I do workshops on universal design in the workplace, to kind of make the space more open, for neurodivergent individuals. And a lot of the times, colleagues are aware when someone is struggling, and showing someone kindness, providing that clarity, providing that guidance can really shift the culture in the organization. It
Hmm.
can minimize that those ideas that it just falls on the manager. That's really what inclusion is, in my opinion. It's not just, coming from the people who make the hiring decisions, or, the executive leaders. It's really from the people, the day-to-day employees who are in that space.
Not necessarily top down. It's got to come from
Yes.
colleagues. I have an interesting observation because, like, I work in a service type job. What other, and I've worked with some people who are pretty clearly neurodivergent. And one of the things that's interesting, they'll get into problems with coworkers, and the problem is they're in a problem with the coworkers, and who goes by the wayside is the customer. The customer gets, shoved out of the communication, and they're waiting to like, oh, I just like to get served my hamburger and fries, or my goods, and this then it goes back to the manager. Why isn't the customer getting served? Where the problem is with the two co-workers who aren't communicating. And it may be personality, but it's with a neurodivergent. It's often a failure to make a good communicate communication between the two or three, and behavior may be problematic or not. But so maybe that's something you guys could speak to, uh, dealing with a coworker in a kind of service environment, because that's got to come up as well. Is that true, Diana? Or
Yeah. I think, I also, that's why, like, a lot of the times I do workshops,
hmm,
I remind people also that not everyone who's neurodivergent is aware they're neurodivergent.
right,
We're finding so many more and more people who've been misdiagnosed or undiagnosed. So I think that's where we just have to focus on people's communication differences, people's processing differences, instead of trying to maybe perhaps attach a label. Because I think what happens for a lot of neurotypical people, or people who may think they're neurotypical, is that they assume that the problem lies on the neurodivergent person,
hmm,
because there is a difference, and it's labeled, and now it's kind of like, in counseling we may refer to it as the identified patient, right? Now everyone's problems falls on the person who's neurodivergent, as opposed to maybe it's the other person who's not communicating effectively, or maybe gaslighting them, or just not being understanding. Because I would love to say that all coworkers are awesome and amazing,
yeah,
but that's just not how the world works.
right,
It'd be
right,
great if it
Mhm.
did. um, it would be so nice if it did, but I think that's the problem. And I think for a lot of neurodivergent people, there's a lot of communication differences when things are more vague, when there's more ambiguity, when there's a lack of clarity. If someone's doing something and it's creating a reaction, or you don't want them to do it, being clear about that boundary. Um, I think a lot of neurotypical people just assume everyone knows how they feel and how they think. And because
right.
it's quote unquote a social norm, right? We must all know it. But I always say boundaries change from person to person. Social norms can also change from context to context. So being clear and direct with others, that's the best way you could get your point across, as perhaps that may feel uncomfortable. But again, I go back to that clarity with kindness.
Yeah. The um, one of the things that I would think would shed some light on this whole area would be to point out to the neurodivergent person that uh, workplace or these type of problems are always going to happen. They're not, or they occur not just with you, but with everyone, and that's a decent starting point for understanding that while this is a bad thing that's going on, or you don't want this happening, it can be resolved. The these type of issues happen to everyone, maybe to a different scale, but they're not unique in having a problem at work, so to speak, or something like that. Uh,
Yeah, and sometimes what I talk about with clients is a good way to determine if it's someone else or if it's you is if there's a continuous pattern of reaction. If you go to different people and you keep getting the same reaction out of all these different people, what's the common denominator?
hmm,
Um, it's a good, kind of um, indirect but direct way of being like, okay, maybe there's something you're doing in the moment to create that communication or create that reaction. And maybe that's why we have to think about what we're doing in the moment so we could do something different. Because if you keep doing the same thing over and over and you keep getting the same reaction, again, going back to that desirable outcome, is that something you want to have? Thinking about the consequences of having that continuous reaction. Um, and I sometimes see that with some of my students when they struggle socially and they go to a person, they say they're sorry. And the
hmm,
person will say, okay, but then they keep doing it. And what I often tell my students is the best way to say you're sorry is to create a different action. If you keep saying you're sorry, but if you keep engaging in the same behavior, that means that that's an indication that you're not proving you're sorry. Um, a lot of people like to determine, you know, other people are sorry or they're willing to change based on their behaviors and actions.
yeah.
That's the best as opposed to what they verbally state.
I'm sorry is not a get out of jail or a magic bullet, you might say. It's
Yes.
actions. Yeah, it's actions that are going to determine. So I'm sorry. I'm not going to send you another email. Let's talk
Hmm.
on the phone in another week. Okay, something like that, right?
Yes.
That's wonderful, Diana. Thank you so much for sharing those insights. Um, so. It brings us back to this person who is going to school, possibly anxious at the get-go, possibly terrified, and starts to reach out to their contact points. Is there, um, I guess, are there tools that you use besides, are you getting enough, um, you walking or physical fitness? Do you make suggestions outside the academic bubble, so to speak, how does that work?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So for Bridges specifically, we provide academic, social, transitional, and vocational support services. So we're really looking holistically at the student. But as you mentioned, sometimes what we see for some of our students is the transition doesn't just bring on academic or social difficulties. It may bring on some comorbidities that come out more so. If a student is used to being perhaps the smartest student in their class, and that's where their sense of self identity and self esteem comes from, and now here they are in the class, and maybe they're not seen as the smartest. Sometimes that may bring on anxiety and depression. And then what happens? So we do often ask to speak to any psychologist or psychiatrist that they may have. But if they don't have one, we always work with our student counseling center. We also have a list of local referrals because we want to understand that not everything can be done in our wheelhouse. But then
Right.
also we talk with students about certain things they're doing. We talk about nutrition because some of them have those sensory differences, especially in the interoception. So if they don't know when they get hungry, they may not be eating. And in high school, there's
Mm.
always that lunch hour. In college now, you have to figure out when lunch is, and that malnutrition can also impact them emotionally.
That-
Also, what they may be eating, because, I had one student when I first started working for the program who ate out of a vending machine, and we found out he did that for a week because he couldn't go into the cafeteria because it was too stimulating for him sensory wise. And he didn't really know how to order the food with the mobile app. So he just read on the vending machine that there was these bars that said healthy. So he
mm.
said, "Oh, I could eat these healthy bars, and that's my sense of nutrition." And clearly, after a week, we noticed a clear distinction in how he was demonstrating and how he was, appearing. And I don't know what made me think, but I kind of asked him, like, "Oh, what are you eating right now?" And he's like, "Oh, these healthy bars." I said, "Okay, great. What else did you eat today?" And that's when we found out that's all he was
Always
eating
eating.
for a week
Yeah.
straight. Yeah. So we had to come up with different times for him to go to the cafeteria when it was less crowded. I was also able to demonstrate with him how to use the mobile app. So he was able to just like pick up food. So he didn't really have to have interactions with anyone because it was just way too much for him to navigate through a sea of people, get his food, talk in front of everyone, and process everything auditory wise, but also the aspect of crowds and closeness. It was just a
So,
horrible sensory violation, as Stephen puts it.
Yeah,
so this is
exactly. And it's
yeah.
yeah, one thing that comes to mind is the literal interpretation of language.
Mm.
And so it's a healthy bar. It says so right on the package. It says so on the machine. So that should be okay. And then being mindful of sensory and social differences. And so going to the cafeteria when it's not busy, that's what I do when I eat out. I try to go before everybody else does. And it might mean an early dinner, or a very late dinner, or maybe just eating at home too.
Mm. This is great because in a sense, this student showed some initiative and tried to come up with a solution,
Yeah.
and but it was kind of a limited solution, very limited, and maybe not as healthy as well, for a lot of reasons, not as healthy. So you guys expanded on his solution, which was to say, okay, you're doing this, but uh, still need to be able to get to the cafeteria. That's a good goal, and ordering out or using the app is another option. So you really um, opened up to his horizons there, and you know these are one of those situations where you solve this type of issue and you're solving another problem too, maybe a greater problem, that of being extraordinarily focused on, as Stephen put it, the literal translation, healthy bar. I need something healthy. Okay, I can get healthy, healthy, healthy every day this week by just going to the vending machine and the rest of the noise goes away. But it's not like that. There's always going to be noise. And
Mhm.
the what you enhanced was their capability of dealing with the noise, or the working to get to the cafeteria where it is less crowded, but maybe there'll be some distractions, but manageable distractions, or learning to use the app where you make a personal connection to get your food or something like that. So kudos to you once again, you guys once again for catching a problem and solving it. And for the student, like I suggest, there's a greater um, there's a greater solution going on here that they can make that leap for themselves at some point, which is ideal, correct? That would be
Yeah.
ideal. Yeah. Uh, so, any other comments on that scenario? Because I love that scenario. That's the healthy bar conundrum, you might say.
Yeah.
Don't eat out of the vending machine every day for the week because that's not necessarily good. Um, what would you call a similar situation? Maybe um, for going to the same movie over and over again or something like that to because someone said you got to get out more, do some recreation, and we said, well, I went to see a movie, and what did you do after that? Well, I went to see the same movie again and again and again because I enjoyed that movie, but that's limiting. That's limiting. Um,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah,
um,
so I would say, like, sometimes what we do, for example, with our social coach meetings is we work with students on what their desired goals are. Is it making new friends? Is it joining a club on campus? Is it figuring out how to really just talk with someone? And I think, a lot of people assume, especially when it comes to neurodivergent people, you know, that clubs and meetings and groups are set up to be accessible. And I think that's where there's a lot of hidden barriers. I've even heard it from parents where they'll just tell their students, "Oh, just go to this club. It should be fine." But it's like, expecting someone who's on the spectrum to be brave enough, because I would say it's about them challenging their anxiety to go into a room with people you
right,
don't know, and know how or what to expect in that meeting, can be very anxiety provoking. And then figuring out how to communicate with someone, how to really talk to someone, how to make friends in that setting. Um, it could be very, again, anxiety triggering. So, one of the things we do is we have peer mentors, who are our undergrad students who volunteer with us, and we really work with training them, to understand different needs of neurodivergent students. Um, and it's been really a beneficial factor for our students in becoming more social, because having someone they know who understands them individually, who already built a trusting relationship with, and to go with them to these club meetings, to go with them to the gym just to figure out how to use the machines, to
right,
take a walk on campus so they're not just alone sitting in their thoughts. That's what a lot of our peer mentors do. And I always say that's really the foundation of our inclusion at Adelphi, is that relationship they build with the students.
right,
And what's amazing is that we find a lot of our students who become extremely social due to this relationship. And what happens is that when they become upperclassmen, they actually end up becoming a peer mentor themselves, because they become active, they become involved on campus. We've even had some students who've started clubs themselves. Because, for example, there's a games club. They wanted a group for gaming and there was nothing there. So they created that. Another group started a Mario Party club because they all love Mario Party and it's not enough to just play with themselves. Um, so they all just gather. And, these are now Adelphi official clubs. So I often say what's amazing is that these were clubs built by neurodivergent students who now benefit everyone.
that's
And
awesome.
they,
Yeah,
yeah, and they become peer mentors themselves. And, again, because they really want to pay it forward, they really want to give back to the other incoming students. And I think it's something when incoming students see other neurodivergent students who are just like them when they came in. And I think, again, that's really what creates that momentum of like, wow, like when you came, like you didn't have any friends and now you have so many friends and you found your place of belonging. Um, I think that's one of our most powerful services personally, in our
right.
program.
That what's really striking to me when you talked about clubs is that while these are organizations on campus that are supposed to be welcoming, they want new members. But to a neurodivergent, they may seem extremely exclusive, and
Yeah.
like how do I get in there can be as difficult as getting into a new job, or it's just that that's the way it is for them. I could definitely see that. So, if you're trying to build a outside the classroom network of friends or even entertainment, it's as equally as difficult as you know, navigating success in the classroom. It's profound point because you think of clubs as being, we want new members, we want people to come and,
Yeah,
and it's not, it ain't quite the case for someone with autism. They may see that as that's an activity that I really would be interested in, yet this club looks like a closed door to me. It looks like a complete closed off um, and a peer mentor or someone who could walk them through the entry or the first meetings would be absolutely crucial. Is that's what I'm getting. Uh, Stephen,
definitely.
Stephen, what's your experience with clubs and stuff like that? Stephen, is that
Uh,
bike clubs perhaps or
yeah, I mean, certain clubs can be very good, very um,
accommodating or
well, accommodating and interesting. So if you have a deep interest in something, certainly it can be good to explore what clubs are out there or available, or possibly even starting your own. Like I did in high school, being interested in bicycling, I remember mentioning it to a teacher, and that teacher said, "Well, why don't we start a bicycle club?"
yeah,
We did.
yeah,
And
that's
so I
great.
planned all of these bicycle tours and making maps and so on, and that was very enjoyable. However, as Diana suggested, it's important to be aware of the uh, social and environmental considerations of whatever that club is. So if there's for example, a train spotter club, if that's what you're into, uh, great stuff to talk about. A great way to avoid all the small talk and get directly into the nerdery of spotting trains.
Right,
But we also need to consider where does that club meet? Is there a certain location? And are there sensory issues related to that location? Because the other people may not have auditory issues, so they're perfectly fine meeting in a what they consider is a not too noisy bar, but may
right,
be intolerable for the autistic person. And similarly, there may be social aspects that can be challenging. So these things need to be looked into before joining the club. Got to take them into consideration.
right. So it's not just topic, is what you're saying, Stephen. It's
Yeah, it
also,
goes beyond topic.
oh boy, it has to be a level of compatibility or work well. I can work well with it or guidance. How can I make this work? Which
Right.
is,
Yeah.
yeah,
And it
that's
makes me always think about too, often in vocational placements too, they do a lot of these team building exercises, right? Or these company get-togethers. And I think sometimes vocational organizations don't realize how they may be creating barriers for neurodivergent people. I had one client who talked about how every month they would have like a company gathering, and it was always at a bar or always at a restaurant. And it was just too noisy for her to attend, too crowded. And she felt like because she wasn't able to partake in those events, the company was then going to think that she doesn't want to engage, she doesn't care about the company. Now here she is not invested when that wasn't the case at all. It's just, it was a sensory barrier for her. And, I always think about that. There's a lot of companies that do team building exercises, and it's always like, let's go around the room and say one fun fact about you. And I know so many neurodivergent people that are like, that is too vague, or can you give an example of what that is? Because a fun fact can be maybe too open ended for some people,
right.
or expecting them to speak
Just
in front of
go.
a crowd of people that they don't know.
Yeah, that's right. Which is why when I do that very thing, fun fact, which I do on the first day of class. And I may or may not have neurodivergent students, and some of them who are non-neurodivergent, it just may be too hard. So, which
Mm,
is why I always put a qualifier. I always say a fun fact might be an experience that you've had, or a situation, or a hobby. And in
mm.
that way, you're providing a menu.
That's awesome, Stephen. So, even in that small thing, you offer a little bit of guidance instead of say, where is it a team building exercise? Tell us something about you. Like that's too open ended, as Diana put it. But
Right.
but Stephen, when you say fun fact, and then you give them the menu of options, something will click. Something will likely click. Is that true, Stephen? Is that
Yeah,
your
exactly. Yeah, provide that menu. We do much better.
mm,
Autistic and neurodivergent people do much better when there's a menu to choose from.
I love it. That's really insightful. Um, well, guys, we are bumping up again up to like an hour and a half now. Any closing arguments there, to borrow a phrase from the legal department? What do you think, Diana? Um, your recent trip to Paris influence your thinking on stuff a little bit? The conference that both you and Stephen attended?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting going around the world and seeing how people view disability, and very different perspectives. Even in Greece, for example, I always say there's always autistic people out there in the world, but not everyone is very um, welcoming or wanting, others to know that they have a person with a disability in their family. Um, and I think also not all countries are as progressive as perhaps the United States. And also, I would say the United Kingdom, I think we're getting there, but still, it doesn't change the fact that, there are neurodivergent people out there. There are people who need that level of support.
Mm.
um, so I think that's why it's even more so important for us to be going around the world and sharing our best practices, sharing our success stories, sharing what works, and also comparing, because I'm sure there's other countries there that are doing really cool things that maybe we are not privy to. And that's really how we create innovative support services, because everyone's different. So what's going to work for one is not going to work for all. And that's why it's really important for all of us to compare and contrast what we're doing.
That's you brought up something that was a memory for me because both Stephen and I worked with a group in Russia. We did a Miller Method program, the group in Russia, and we were struck by people saying that, "Oh man, you guys are, you really ahead of us in this area, and in this area." And other people would tell us that, yeah, this is the program you're working with is the top tier in Russia. The rest of the is often like what we were doing in the 70s. This is what I got back
Yeah.
feedback. And so they really, there's a lot of potential for progression. And yet, these professionals came up with some great insights and ideas, and the individuals are very strong in some areas and very dedicated. So it goes to show you that um, you have to treat the individuals, neurodivergent or professional people, with as individuals, and regardless of where their program might be, what or their resources might be, it's quite profound. They may
Yeah.
the individuals will have a lot to offer. So,
Now, that's what
uh,
I find as well, is no matter where I go, and in Paris, we were very pleasantly surprised to find organizations who have gotten away from what France is known for in terms of autism, the
Mhm.
psychiatric model
Mm.
Yeah.
of treating autism, blaming the parents, thinking that psychology is the answer. There is a place for psychology and for counseling, but that's
Yeah.
counseling as counseling to the autistic person or for the autistic person as an
Yeah.
Yes.
autistic person, not
Not
trying to
not
cure or
because of the
eliminate.
not because of the autism.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. And so
I
there's
got you.
some very interesting research going on in terms of inclusion and belonging
Mm.
and working with the autistic individuals and people with disabilities. One organization we spent the day with, we've got to get Diana involved in this organization, known as INSEI. It must be an abbreviation for something which I'm not sure of yet. And another organization, actually, that comes from Russia, known as Naked Heart. And it's an
Okay.
organization that was founded by an actress who has a pretty significantly affected autistic sister, I believe,
Mm.
is the story, or something pretty close to that. And so she started this organization. And recently, maybe a few years ago, after things got to be challenging in Russia, they moved to France. So I was happy to find them in Paris. That's where they're located now. And I spent an afternoon with them. They're doing some interesting things too.
It sounds like it. It sounds like it. Um, all right. Well, this has been great. Diana, I want to thank you. Stephen, I want to thank you as well. Your insights, you're in the trenches with these kids or young adults, and your insights are so valuable. Um, let's try to do this again. Let's do
I would
another
love
one.
to.
Yeah.
I,
Uh,
I, I always love intellectually stimulating conversations such as these.
well, well, I think there's an element of problem solving that is in your work that I think is great. It's just amazing. The I often refer to when working the Miller method, these invisible steps. You're doing a microsurgery to get um, the kind of reactions that you're describing, and solving from the healthy bar meal. The healthy bar conundrum is going to work its way into
That is a good one.
my yeah. That's a wonderful example anecdote. So thank you both again, and let's plan another session and discuss some more topics in the future.
Yeah, I would love to.
All right, and enjoy your vacation, Diana. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
spending time. Thanks for
Yeah,
spending time.
enjoy your break.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Again, I really appreciate this. And I hope you both have a wonderful day.
Thanks,
Okay.
and you too.
You too. We'll see you.
All right, bye.
Take care.
Goodie. Well, that was
Hey,
good, Stephen.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm gonna shut off the recording.
Okay.
Yes.